Type in. All right. Well then, without any further ado, let's now turn to our speakers. Willie, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session this afternoon. My topic is pretty straightforward. It's about the reading and writing connection. I think we all know that reading and writing are connected. But today, my focus will be on how we can strengthen the connection, the link between reading and writing. So that is one of the takeaways today. The other one is how we can use reading as a springboard to developing writing. So these are the two things that I want to get across and I want to share with you. And hopefully we can learn one or two things after my presentation. Let's get started. The four skills: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Sherry, if you could have your audio on, you could, probably respond to some of my questions here. All of the four skills are challenging for our students. Is that a yes or a no, Sherry?
All of the skills are challenging for our students.
Yes, they are all challenging, right? Yes.
Yes.
And productive skills are usually more challenging than receptive skills. Yeah, you are in agreement with that? Okay. Now the last one is this: what is the most difficult skill for our students across the board? In particular, those who have achieved some level of proficiency, what one skill that continues to be difficult, to be challenging for our students? Please say writing.
Writing.
Good. Yes, writing.
Thank you for your help with that.
Okay, if you look at a graph like this, I'm sure you're very familiar with this kind of graph. I look at the application documents of students, graduate students who want to study with, in my university, and I often see a very, very typical IELTS score here. Now, each graph represents one skill. What are these skills usually? Sherry again. I think Sherry is very good at responding to my questions. What are the...
Writing must be one of the most...
Exactly, yes. Writing is the last one. And what are the two skills that students are usually quite good at, especially in terms of the IELTS skill, IELTS test?
Oh, speaking?
Yes, speaking comes a bit later, actually. This is what it looks like usually.
Okay.
Now, I've seen this again and again and again. Listening and reading are good, speaking slightly below, but writing tends to be, the lowest in terms of students' capability. Now, the question then is this. I think we all know about this, that writing is difficult for you, writing is difficult for me, writing is difficult for L2 students, and even for native speakers. Now, these are probably some of the problems related to writing, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. Unlike speaking, writing is context independent. The speaker, the person you're writing to, is not in front of you. And that makes things really hard because you have to say almost everything. You can't really stop and ask the person, hey, do you understand what I'm writing here? You can't. So that makes writing really challenging. Number two, in terms of the structure and organization, writing is also very demanding. You can't really, deviate very much from the standard, the conventional way of doing a piece of writing, in particular academic writing. You need to use a lot of text signals. Otherwise, you will find that your readers will not be able to follow your train of thoughts very well. So text signals like, however, first I want to do this, second, third, in conclusion, these are things that you have to add, to say in your essay. Another thing that makes writing difficult is this: we need to use the rather formal and standard variety of the language that we're using. For example, the word look at is very common in conversation, but in especially academic writing, people tend to use the word examine, explore, investigate, and things like that. Put up with. for example, is very common in social interaction, but in writing, you might probably want to use tolerate. Other sources of difficulty. Writing usually requires the use of longer sentences and more complicated grammatical structures as well. And that makes writing, again, difficult. For academic writing in particular, the demand is even higher because you need to know the content very well, and you need to know how to organize the content in such a way that the whole thing is coherent, is easy to understand. And finally, I think you will agree with me, writing generally, academic writing in particular, is slow, is painful, is laborious, and mentally taxing. The good news, now here is something that I want to share with you. The good news is this. The good news is that reading is related to writing. Reading can lead to writing. I think that is something that I've learned over the years. Something that I've learned from reading in the professional literature about the connection between reading and writing. And we can use reading as a springboard to developing students' writing skills. Now let's examine, or let's look at. Did I use look at or examine? Okay, both. Let's look at the connections between reading and writing. We know that they're closely related. We know also that if students can't read, they can't write as well. I think that is a fact. Number two, the next one is good writers are usually good readers. What do you think, Sherry? Good writers are usually good readers.
Yes, I would say so.
I would agree. Yes, I would agree about that too. The next question is for Greg, my friend from Hawaii. Greg, good readers are good writers? Greg, are you there? Good readers are also good writers?
I would agree with Sherry that all good writers are good readers, but not all good readers are good writers.
Exactly, yes, exactly. Now, this is interesting. Whenever I give a workshop on extensive reading, whenever I say that extensive reading can lead to improvement in writing, there's usually one or two teachers who say, no, 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 I have a case. I have an example of a student who read a lot, but the writing is not very good. Yeah. So yes, I agree. Usually good readers are good writers, but not always. I think that's the thing. So that is the gap, actually. And that is the gap that we need to address. If we are very much into reading, into extensive reading, there is something that we need to also pay attention to. We need to focus on, because reading does not always lead to good writing. So they are similar. Reading and writing are similar, but they are not the same. Now, this is a quote. This is some of the reasons why they are related, but they're not the same. Reading involves a lot of comprehension processes. In other words, what we do in our head is known as semantic processing. We try to understand, we try to comprehend things. It's not a bad thing. Actually, it's a good thing. But producing, speaking, writing, they require a different kind of processing. This is known as syntactic processing. We need to translate ideas, meaning, into words, into phrases, into sentences that are grammatically acceptable, that are textually also comprehensible. So that extra thing which makes reading does not always lead to writing. In other words, receptive knowledge is good, but it does not always automatically translate to productive knowledge. So they're similar but not identical. Here is a quote just to provide a support for what I just shared with you from Fitzgerald and Shanahan. They've been doing a lot of stuff on reading, on writing, and the relationship between the two. And after years and years of research, they come to this conclusion. If reading and writing really were identical, not just similar, then everything learned in one would automatically transfer to the other. And we know that that is not the case. Similar, but not identical. Now, this is where we need to now explore different models for dealing with, for teaching writing. What I have here is two different models. The first one is known as a direct model, that reading automatically translates to writing. That's called a direct model. And the other one is the indirect model. The indirect model requires that we need to do something. Teachers need to help our students to see the connection, to help the students make use of what they have read and translate this into writing. The first one, the direct model, is represented by Stephen Krashen, essentially. Now, this is what he says. When enough reading is done, all the necessary grammatical structures and discourse rules for writing will automatically be presented to the writer in sufficient quantity. And Krashen would probably say that is more than enough. If you read a great deal, you'll be able to write as well. One thing that we need to remember when Krashen says enough, that is enough in terms of quantity, in terms of the amount of reading. Usually our students do not have the quantity, and also the quality of reading. Quality here refers to the different varieties of texts, of genres that the students are exposed to. So these two will have to be in place if you want to adopt the direct model. Researchers like Krashen would agree that the direct model is the way to go, and that's enough. But people like us who have been working, on the ground, so to speak, dealing with the students of all sorts, would probably say that the direct model is good, but it's not enough. I think we need to do something. We need to add something to it. And that is when we need to consider a number of models. And this is Willie's indirect model, adopted from many different sources. So if you want to help your students see the link more clearly between reading and writing, then you need to consider at least 4 different aspects. The first one is we need to have a strong theory of language. Number 2, we also need to find a good theory of language learning. And this too is not enough, because we also need to consider the teacher and the student. So these are the 4 things that I want to get across here to you in the next 5 or 10 minutes. Greg, give me 10 minutes. Okay, theory of language. I think we are familiar with the structural model of language, all about words, about phrases, about sentence structures and things like that. The other model, the functional model, I think is now the most popular and the more widely adopted model in language education. One example of the functional model of language is known as the genre model. The idea that a text is meaningful, the idea that a piece of writing is always written in relation to a specific audience in mind, and the context is also very, very clear, whether it's informal context, formal context, academic context, and things like that. So there are 3 major things that we need to consider when we adopt a functional model of the language. And later we will see how this model, pans out in our discussion. So in terms of the theory of language, we need to adopt this model or other similar models, but we need to consider the purpose, the audience, and the context of the situation. In terms of the theory of language, I would probably stick to these 2 theories. There may be other theories out there, but these 2 are probably the most relevant. The first one is the input theory. This is where the extensive reading idea and extensive listening idea are based upon. The input theory, the idea that comprehension is good, the idea then that a large quantity of language through reading and through listening are a nice way of helping students improve on their English language proficiency. Number 2, I think research also tells us that input alone is not enough. We need to add something to it. This is where the noticing hypothesis by Dick Schmidt comes into the picture. Yeah, so we are going later to see how these 2 theories will be, will be used to describe the model. The teacher. Now, this is the most important part. In the indirect model, the teacher plays an important role in helping students to develop their writing proficiency through reading. So in terms of the teacher, we need an approach that connects reading, writing, and noticing. And here is a model that I think can accommodate not only the theory of language, but also the theory of language learning. I think many of you are familiar with this model. It's known as the genre-based model for teaching writing, basically, which begins with modeling, deconstructing, joint construction, independent construction, and focus feedback. So I'm going to go through this very, very quickly now. Modeling. Modeling is what we teach. Modeling is the initial stage of teaching writing. Modeling is preparing our students for the job that they will need to be doing later. First point to remember is this: simple ideation activity like brainstorming for ideas and everything, that is good, but that is not enough. I think our students need to see this. They need to see a lot of ideas. They need to see how these ideas are represented in language forms. The words that are used to express those ideas, the grammatical features, the text features, and things like that. This is where the input theory comes in. At this stage, I think the students will need to be presented with a large number of model texts. And the model text here can come in the form of reading text or listening text. I would use both. Sample or model text to help the students see that, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what me, the teacher, want you to be able to produce in your own writing. And I'm going to show you all these models for you to appreciate, for you to understand, and things like that. The modeling thing is very important. And I want to share with you a quote here from a book. Now, this book is not very popular among academics. Then it's not, but it's very popular with real people out there who wants to really learn how to write. Very interesting stuff. Look at this. The language is non-technical, but this is exactly the kind of process that a lot of people go through. Writing is learned by imitation. If anyone asks me how I learned to write, I would say I learned by reading the men and women who were doing the kind of writing I wanted to do and trying to figure out how they did it. If I want to write like Mark Helgeson, for example, I would download every single piece of research that he has done, and I will read it again and again until all the language features and language patterns and his style of writing, stick in my head. At least that would be the initial thing. But later on, I may make changes and develop my own style of writing. But the first thing will be imitation, or creative imitation, if you like. The second part is deconstructing. Again, this is part of the teaching that we do. Giving a model is not enough. This is the part where focus noticing, this is the noticing hypothesis again. The teacher's job here is to highlight important features of a specific text type that you want your students to be able to do at the end. For example, here's a narrative which has been broken down, deconstructed basically into different components. But of course, you don't want the students to pay attention to every single thing. That would not make a lot of sense for the students. Highlight the important things. Maybe this week, focus on the text structure, the way the text, a narrative is organized, orientation, complication, resolution, and coda. And then the following week, you want to focus on some of the important language features like the tenses or the word phrases that are typically found in a narrative text like this. Okay, so the key word here is focused noticing. The next part is quite straightforward. The students are almost ready, but they're not ready yet. Now, this is where the joint construction comes into the picture. The student and the teacher jointly producing a piece of writing. The idea of writing with the teacher writing with a lot of support from the teacher. An example of this, there are many other examples. Provide a frame like this, provide a list of vocabulary words that the students may need to use in their writing. So this is the joint construction bit, yeah? Once you're happy that the students are okay, more or less okay, then the next bit is, I think this is a part that you are all very familiar with, the process writing bit, planning, drafting, revising, editing, submitting. I think you know about this, yeah? Okay, the last bit is focus feedback. Again, the key word here is focus, focus, focus. You can't really correct everything that the students have written. I think we are familiar with this idea that, you know, when we give feedback, we can do it extensively, meaning we can correct almost everything that the students have produced, or we can choose to do a more selective, targeted, focused feedback. I would go with the second one. The third one, if you are tired after a long semester, then small feedback or minimal feedback or no feedback. I mean, that is okay too. Yeah, but generally focus, targeted feedback. The research, again, is very clear. If you do this, chances are your students will pay attention, your students will do something about it. Just some tips just to help us remember when we give focus feedback. 3 things to remember. Number 1, our feedback will have to be positive. Number 2, specific. And number 3, clear. Keep this in mind. Anything that is positive is likely to be remembered by the students. Anything that is negative will be mostly ignored by our students. So this is the model that I just presented. Yeah, there's the modeling, deconstruction, joint construction, independent construction, and focus feedback. This is how we can possibly help our students to connect, to see the connection more closely between reading and writing. Students' role, the teacher's role is very clear. The student's role now, they simply have to continue doing this, read more and write more. There's no other way. People say, Sherry, that practice makes perfect. Yes.
Perfect.
That is really not accurate, actually. It has to be perfect. Yes. Thank you, Greg. Perfect practice that makes perfect. Just practice, 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 writing, writing, writing does not lead to any improvement. I don't believe that is the case. It has to be supervised practice by the teacher, helping the students along the way, giving the students enough language input, and also highlighting to the students the kind of things that they need to pay attention to. Also ask the students to be engaged in what is known as writerly reading. You read a piece of text as if you will be writing something similar in the future. Now, it has been nicely termed as writerly reading. The students will also be doing readerly writing as well. That is interesting because audience is very important, right? So unless we point out to the students, hey, students, when you write, do not submit your work right away. Chances are your first draft is horrible because the first draft is only about you, your perspective, your point of view. Engage students in what is known as readerly writing. Pay attention to who your audience is and pay attention to the kind of things that you need to do to help your students to help your readers to be able to follow your text nicely. So read like a writer and write like a reader. Think about this. I think after a while, this whole things will make a lot of sense to you because that is what we go through as a reader and as a writer ourselves. So these are really indirect model basically for making the connection closer, stronger between reading and writing. We need a theory of language. We need a theory of language learning. We need to ensure that the teacher adopts an approach, a method that connects the two. And we also promote students writing through frequent and supervised practice. Conclusion, 1 minute. So I have shared with you some ways of helping us and students see the connection between reading and writing, strengthen the connection further. And in order to do that, we need some you know, some basis. We need a theory of language. We need a theory of language learning. We need to empower the teacher and also the students. And I really hope that the students will be able to eventually be able to produce a decent piece of writing. Pedagogical implication, very clear.
Of course.
It makes sense to separate them artificially because they are so related. Sorry. In other words, a reading teacher should.
I'm sorry, Willie,
also
could you repeat that last 30 seconds? We had a glitch there.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I think so. Yes, I think pedagogically, I think we need to consider integrating reading and writing. Do not teach them separately, but teach them together. And that means a reading teacher should also be a writing teacher. And if that happens, your school, your university may double your salary because you are doing 2 jobs now instead of just 1. You're a reading teacher and you are also a writing teacher. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, you've been a great audience. Here is a free gift for you. All these wonderful books are available in my website, including the first one is about what I just presented, bridging the reading-writing connection in second language learning. And there are many other resources available on in my website, Willie's ELT Corner, all free for viewing and download if you do that before the end of today. Greg, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Willie. That was wonderful. And I was really glad to hear